attempting to join online.
Okay. Here. Eric.
Yep.
Ronnie Wright will not be here.
Okay. And then Kate.
Kate Rose.
She's not.
She's the alternate.
Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to the approval of the agenda.
Approve the agenda as written.
You know what? I'm sorry. Without Jenna, we don't have a quorum. Is it 5 or 6, 7?
Oh, there's 3 here. It's 5.
It's fine.
Oh, it's a 5. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm thinking about the commission. Okay, go ahead. There's Jenna.
Welcome back from vacation.
Okay, so all in favor then?
Aye.
Then let's go ahead and move on to the approval of the minutes for the meeting of June 12th, 2023.
I move to approve the minutes.
All in favor?
And Jenna has joined us.
Okay.
Can you hear us, Jenna?
I can.
Okay.
Sorry for the technical difficulties.
That's all right. We had them this morning too.
All right. Jenna, I'll hand it to you. Did roll call and we approved the agenda and the minutes.
Okay, is there anyone in the meeting that for public comments?
Yes, we have one.
Laura, I can't really hear you because you're not close enough to the mic, but go ahead and take it away.
Good morning, Laura Reniger with the Oak Harbor Garry Oak Society. I'm just here for a few minutes to share some exciting things with you. One, the Would-Be Communal Tourism Board published a newsletter that has an article on the Garry Oaks of Oak Harbor and why our town is named what it is. It's a really nice, comprehensive, I'll pass this around for you all to share. I have 2 copies. Really nice newsletter. And then once again, the same body, Would-Be Communal Tourism, published their updated field guide for 2024, and the Garry Oak Tree Tour is listed. So there's that. You can pass around. And so the 2 things that we're going to share with you, I'm just going to specifically talk about the connectivity of the tree tour itself. And so we're on the agenda for a potential sign in Smith Park that would look approximately this big, the same brown sort of parks color, established parks color. And this has a QR code that would link to our website and to the Garry Oak Tree Tour. Just so if people say they're from out of town, they go to Would-Be Coffee, they go up the street to drink their coffee in the park, and they're like, what is this? Oh, this is a park. Can we learn more about it? And then that way, then they could just scan that and easily go ahead and start doing the tour. And I think that was all I was going to say, and I'll leave the time to Kyle. Thank you so much.
Hey, real quick, since this is a agenda item, I just want to get the park board's feedback on it. Can you talk real briefly about where we're looking at posting this sign?
So yeah, thank you, Brian. Currently, there are 2 signs in the park that the top of the sign talks about the deferred mowing during springtime for the bloom. And so the idea would be no new posts or signposts are needed. This would just be mounted underneath the existing sign. So it'd be super easy to install. And our volunteer group would certainly pay for it, pay for both the signs. So there'd be 2, one on the north entrance and one on the Jensen Street entrance. So yeah, it'd be really easy peasy for the city to just install them once they get delivered. Yeah.
You guys have any questions or concerns about that? Just because it was a separate organization sign on city property, wanted to just run it through all the channels. Community development didn't have a problem with it. And I think it's
I mean, I think as long as the only thing I didn't double check was code, but I didn't recall hearing anything that would be a problem. So
David didn't have any comments.
sign itself worked, and the QR code's a great idea because that's what we're using for a lot of signage.
Excellent. Okay,
Makes sense to me.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So is he gonna talk on the
Right,
agenda
hello.
item or are
Oh.
we still on citizen comments?
I don't know, this is public comment.
We're still public comment,
Okay,
right? Yeah.
okay.
Okay. Hello, I just want to introduce myself. My name's Kyle Renninger. I'm a fifth generation Woodby Islander here. I'm also on the board of directors of the Garry Oak Society. One of the agenda items today is the Washington Heritage Register nomination for Smith Park. I'm the one who did the research. Well over 100 hours worth of research went into that and compiled the nomination. So we get to that agenda item. If you have any questions for me about the nomination process or the form or anything contained therein, I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Are there any other public comments? Nope. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the first item on the agenda, the Garry Oak sign at Smith Park and Smith Park historical designation.
If there's no other further questions or comments, I'll just look for motion for approval for placement of sign.
I make a motion to approve that placement of signs in parks.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
You might be trying to use them.
Okay, did everybody say aye? My screen froze.
Yeah.
Unanimous.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, so next item is the Windmill plans review.
Yeah, we have item B, Smith Park historical designation. I think.
Oh, Smith, okay. Kyle, go ahead.
Oh, sure.
Shall I come back up to the microphone?
Yeah, or you can sit, as long, if you talk loud, the microphone should get most of the room.
Sure. I know what it's like to be on the Zoom other end here, so I'll speak into the microphone.
And I'll throw that. Washington historical.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Brian. So what the Garry Oak Society has prepared is a nomination for Smith Park to be listed on the Washington Heritage Register. And before I'll start, I'll give you just kind of a little rundown, because sometimes I think there's a little confusion between the different registers. So right now there's 3 different registers. There's a city historic register, right? That's the local level. The next is the Washington Heritage Register. That's kind of the second level, which recognizes items that are significant to Washington and our local heritage that is important to specific regions of Washington. There's also a third register, which I think is probably the one that is most publicly known, which is the National Register, which is part of the Department of Interior's program. So we've been working with both city staff on the archaeological side, as well as Brian on the park side, and our partners at the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation at the state on getting a nomination for Smith Park. And in working with them, their suggestion was to have this park listed on the Washington Heritage Register. That was the state's recommendation, and so that's the path that we pursued. And so we assembled the nomination form. It's quite comprehensive. I've got a copy here. I mean, it's pretty thick. Maps, photographs, documentation. So to give just a quick rundown of why this park is worthy of a Heritage Register nomination, we have to go all the way back to the beginning, and that even precedes the founding of our town. So Native Americans for millennia have lived in this region, and the Garry Oaks, savannas, and landscapes that we see are not accidental forests. Many of them were used for crop production, for their acorns. There were controlled burns that were set, which gives us those high canopies without the branches on the bottom, and they lived here for millennia. Once the area was developed, we saw the Barringtons, who eventually came to own the area that now is part of Smith Park. And even pre incorporation of our town, Smith Park was used as the town square, right? I think we think of, normally, especially small towns have kind of a town square, a gathering area. So we know Smith Park was that area even before Oak Harbor became a town. Christina Barrington, who took over after her husband passed away, she actually platted the very first plat of Oak Harbor, which is really cool. She's kind of our founding mother, if you will, for the town. She created the first plat. And it was not an accident that Smith Park, and you'll see in the map if Brian's willing to share that aspect of you can see in the plat that Smith Park was actually right in the center of the plat, right? This truly was kind of in the center of our community. And so eventually Christina Barrington, she sold to a man who we know as Lewis Smith, AKA Smith Park, right? So she sells her plat. Lewis Smith platted other lands, which actually includes City Hall and this part of town. And Lewis made a deal with the townspeople. He said, if you buy enough of my lots, I will give you the park. I will actually make the park part of, the free public park that we know today. And so as history goes, the townspeople and others were able to buy enough of Lewis Smith's lots, and he deeded the park to the town. And it was our town's very first physical asset. We had nothing but the park back in 1915, which is pretty cool. And so inside the deed, Lewis Smith wrote that the park was to be used for a free public park. And so that was well over 100 years ago. And again, it's not by accident that the park retains much of its historic integrity. And that's what the state is going to be looking at when they assess this application, is if someone from the time period of when Christina Barrington was alive, when the town was first created, if they were to be suddenly magically transported back to Smith Park today, would they recognize the place? Does it still contain that historic integrity? And the beauty is, because many of our forebears who have come before us and stewarded the park made sure that it still very much looks like it did back then, right? We still have our Garry oaks, we still have the open landscape, we still have the native flora and fauna that is there today. So we prepared, and there it is, right? So there is her very first plat of the town. In red is Smith Park, and you can see it's right in the center of the very first plat with trees that are hundreds of years old. So what does this designation do? It's really an honorary designation that is meant to increase public awareness of the historic integrity of the park. It's also a point of community pride, right? To say, hey, we have this historic park in our downtown. And it's also to recognize the historic integrity and help protect it in the future, right? So the future generations know, hey, this is a historic place. This is really important. I think it's interesting to note that, this does not mean we are ceding control to the state, right? The city of Oak Harbor still retains control over the park. The state would have the opportunity to consult with the city if the city decided to make changes that triggered a SEPA review, but the city still ultimately retains control. So we see this as something that's really positive for our community. Many of the other island communities have a lot of history that's been recognized through these different channels. Oak Harbor has very little that has been recognized, but that doesn't mean that we aren't historic and that we aren't worthy. So we're really excited about this proposal for the park. And if approved by the city council, we hope that we can put some sort of a small plaque and recognition there in the park, and then we can use this for tourism promotion and community pride promotion.
It's interesting to note that we don't have any historically designated structures or landmarks in the city, except for Neal Tower, which is a local historical designation. So this would be the first as far as outside of the local state historical. I think the state had come back to Kyle saying that they wanted to get the owner approval or recommendation
Right.
letter, right?
Mhm.
Or have a local designation set. That local designation is overseen by the Historic Preservation Commission, but we don't currently have active quorum. Right. So this item is going before council on the 26th. workshop. So in lieu of a historic preservation commission, and the fact that it's a parkland, I want to bring this forward. Your thoughts, comments, and we're looking for a motion of recommendation for the application, if you feel that's appropriate to go to council.
I'd like to express my appreciation first for this work. It's a sort of a labor of love, I can tell, and
It is.
it's really exciting. I actually would love to go back and read that whole application.
Sure.
It would be fantastic. And I'm happy to make a recommendation to the council that there's approval for making.
Can you guys speak up just a little bit louder when you're talking?
Sorry.
I think it makes a lot of sense for this to be the first one, honestly. And I think it'd be a good starting point to then start to look around and see what else can be, because in isolation, it's great. As part of something bigger, like, I mean, I think like the Garry Oak tour and stuff, it starts to make a lot more sense to have these historical places highlighted. And I think that park is a nice encapsulation and a visual of what at least the historical emphasis, apart from the naval history of Oak Harbor, is about. So I would also be glad to make that recommendation to City Council.
I forwarded this document to all of you guys this morning. If you want to take a closer look.
Is there any criteria that needs to be met for the register that we currently don't have in place? Or is it done, complete, and just ready to question?
Yeah, so it's all ready. It's all done. It's kind of a sliding scale. I will say it's more subjective, right? So the state's going to review this and they're going to ask a couple questions. Is it older than 50 years, which it is? Does it maintain historic integrity, which it does, right? We still have the Garry Oaks. We still have the Garry Oaks there. We still have the landscape. Is it missing a few of the old structures? So for example, there was a cabin that used to be in the park back in the day, and they used it for bandstands, and the fire department met there and the city council met there, because we obviously, didn't have the city hall today. So there are some elements that are missing, but overall in general, it still very much does keep that historic integrity. Now, let's say, for example, if God forbid, the Garry Oaks were all cut down, right? That would severely impact the historic integrity of the park, right? That's one of the elements. And so in the designation, you'll see we've actually mapped all of the elements. So we've mapped all of the trees. The park path is actually historically significant, which is really interesting. The path that runs diagonally through it is historically significant. So you'll see some of those elements, and the criteria that they use are explained in the application, and each of it has a narrative piece that we've written about that. And then the supporting documents that include photographs and the maps and the deed are all included that kind of build up to that. Thank you.
How does it impact our, what we could go forward with maintenance, and also if we rebuild pathways in there, because some of this infrastructure, the playgrounds are wore out. We'll probably have to either eliminate or add on to, rebuild them in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any ideas on what they're going to require, or will it be business as usual?
Sure. So for maintenance, business as usual, right? So you'll see in the application, there's a difference between contributing elements and non-contributing elements. So things that are contributing are those things that actually apply to the nomination. Those would be the Garry Oak trees. Those would be the open landscape. Those would be things like the wildflowers that have been planted around the Garry Oak trees, right? So those are all contributing elements. Things that are non-contributing, those would be things like the playground equipment, right? That the playground equipment is not historic. The gazebo is not historic. Now, this don't get me wrong. This doesn't mean we have to tear out the gazebo or can't have playgrounds, right? We still can. Those things just don't apply to the nomination. And the reason, go ahead.
If we wanted to add like a new gazebo after this one's lifespan is wore out, we could do that.
Yes, you could, in consultation with the state, right? And so that's why I said earlier that SEPA will apply. So that's the State Environmental Policy Act. However, the city retains ultimate control. So the state consults, however, the city retains ultimate control. So we're not ceding our authority. We're not, tying our hands in any way. However, once it is historic, they will have the opportunity to consult. So if we were going to say, like, we're going to build a pool in the middle of Smith
Correct.
Park. It'd be like, well, that's really not historically, speaking to the integrity, but they're not going to come out and say, you have to mow the lawn by hand, or, you can't, do this, that, or the other.
I see things like the gazebo being upgraded potentially down the road, pathway maybe being lit and widened to more of an ADA accessibility style pathway, but there's nothing saying you can't do it with more of in the theme of the Garry Oaks and set in the style of that time frame, more.
Yeah, it'll be a little unusual because this is it's park land. Normally these designation go towards structures, facilities and things like that. So yeah, I'm curious, because I know it's at least at the national level, it's fairly strict on the facade, what you can change, does it meet historical criteria or not? Like, we had a hard time on, we ended up having to sprinkler the building because we couldn't put an fire egress out because that would violate the historical, criteria for the look of the building. In a parkland where, if we were to put in safety lighting or something like that, I'm not sure that they would have an issue with that.
And I'm sure they're very well versed in doing that. The important piece here is the change reversible? So for example, if we built a new gazebo, if in 50 years we decided to tear it down, could we tear it down, for example, and reverse the change that modern generations made? And for pretty much everything that you're asking for, yes, absolutely. Could we reverse, building a gazebo? Certainly. You could remove the gazebo and turn it back to grass. If you put in lighting, could you take the lighting out? Certainly. So the changes that you were speaking about are reversible changes. Again, I would defer to the state. I'm sure they're very well versed in that. But since it's not like a structure, like Brian was saying, that we have, I think, a lot more flexibility there. As far as the path goes, that would be a consideration where obviously the asphalt, so it's an asphalt path. The asphalt is not what's historic. What's historic is the route, the path. And so that would be things where the state would probably say, hey, can you try to keep the path in relatively the same place with relatively the same shapes as it meanders, for example.
It's not, but we've talked about, it would be nice to widen that path so wheelchair width or stroller width, so people can pass to. And like the lighting in there, you don't really want to light the whole thing up, but a pathway lighting system might be nice in the future too. But those are all things I just want to keep the door open on that we don't have trouble with in the future.
Well, we need to remember too, I think in some of our conversations and workshop, otherwise we've talked about sort of a more minimalist approach in that park anyway, to kind of preserve that open space feel. So, in regards to kind of, I think, what we've been envisioning as a board, what this talks about kind of fits what we're already planning. This just kind of comes along, I think, and enhances it. If I'm not speaking out of turn, I think that's correct. And so kind of what we want for the feel and the environment and all of that of this park, I think this fits, but we do need to make sure, I think, as we're doing this, that we are ready to go on that, so we don't have too much red tape.
That playground in there we'll have to make a decision one day whether we're gonna rebuild or whether we're gonna take it out because it's getting pretty tired.
Yeah.
And I think from our discussions, the thought is remove it and just keep it more of a more naturalized park area with some historical looking theming accents to stuff.
And this designation would open up grant opportunities as well. So once it is a designated park on the Heritage Register, it does open up grant funding opportunities. Any other questions I can answer for you all? You'll see the Heritage nomination. We spent a lot of time at the UW. We actually paid for the Oak Harbor News to be digitized. So this was like a 100-year-old newspaper that we got to dig through, which was really fun. You'll see, lots of cool old historic photographs, some that have, or at least one that's probably never been seen before publicly. There was a cattle show in the park, so that's pretty cool. So you'll see the cattle in the park there as well. And overall, I think a really cool point of community pride. So thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kyle, for coming and all of your hard work putting that together.
So Jen, since this is going to city council, we'd like to look for a recommendation from the board of council on this item when they hear it.
Okay, I'd like to recommend that we move forward with this.
Do you want a motion?
Yeah.
We're gonna do a motion.
Right, does anybody want to motion?
I make a motion to pass this on to city council for their review, to add it to the Washington Historical Register.
I second that.
Right, all those in favor? Okay, motion passes. And can we go ahead and move on to the windmill plans review?
Yeah, so Jim emailed that he wasn't going to be at the meeting today. I don't know if we want to push this, but I'll just give you a brief update on what I know about it. So this is a project by the Rotary Club. They have just approved a contract with P&L, who is doing the engineering and design for this project. I'll show you. I'll show you the conceptual plans. I think there was some concern originally, which I brought up about the design, but this is really probably more for discussion at this point of like placement and just the concept, because the design is not what's shown on this plan. They haven't done it yet, so this is just a placeholder, really. Okay, so the windmill is they are looking to have it be a functional space. It'll be about 35 by 35 foot space, and they'll have restrooms in it, kitchenette, kind of similar to some of our pavilions that we have around the park. The outside of it is concrete, and they are looking for recommendations on like collaring. The two things we talked about was either do it in a very traditional, kind of Dutch windmill look, or the Rotary Club had even suggested trying to match it to some of the existing structures, like the what we call it, the stage, the pavilion out there, with kind of that wood and sort of darker look. So we're going to try and get a couple mock-ups done of what each one of those would look like. And I don't know what the outside is going to end up being. They are, okay, you see my cursor. Right now, they're still trying to figure out the engineering around this. So the windmill is looking to be located here at the end of the west side parking lot. And this orientation isn't even correct. It'll actually be facing this way towards the city. I think the idea behind that is that it has the harbor in the background for photo ops or whatever. The sails would be non-moving, so they'd be stationary. These are, what did he say it was? It's like 80 something feet.
80 something feet is the top of the
Right at the top.
sail.
Okay.
The building itself is somewhere around 50, isn't it? So it's significantly larger than the original one that was built.
So cleaning and maintenance of it is something we're still trying to figure out, like how we would accomplish that. They're also working on the engineering around this, how it connects in to make sure that it's safe and stable, especially with the winds that we experience down there. So there's still a lot of engineering going on with it. And yeah, and here's kind of the placement. So we'll probably bring this back since Jim's not here to present and talk more about it, but just to kind of get it on your guys' radar. And I think I sent this on to everyone, so you can take a look at it. You can see here, it's just kind of this concrete facade with a usable space, a pathway, which we might want to talk more about access to what we do around it. But it's a pretty good footprint here, especially with the surfacing that goes around. So any comments or questions at this point?
And then the site stood out to me initially as a potential issue One, I think that's in that low spot that we had talked about where we didn't have enough fill brought in when we did the construction of the sewage plant. And so how's that going to look like? Are we going to address that issue as far as raising that level up before we think about adding any permanent construction on there? Because it's going to be below high tide line, you know, in theory, where it's sunk down. So that's a concern. Secondly, it is a large footprint, and so it breaks up that entirety of that green space. Fitting in with our vision for that park, is that what we want to do, is sort of have it as a hard border between the two edges, sides of the green space of the park. I'm not opposed to it. I just, in my mind, that's what I'm thinking about, because you're gonna have that line off the corner of the lagoon straight to the windmill, you know, and so now we've got basically a hard border between. So now we're gonna have two halves of the park to the west of the splash pad, which that we kind of have two halves of the park anyway, right? We have the ball fields, the Bailey's playground, and up to the splash park, and then we kind of have the green space all the way to the basketball courts. And now we're gonna have a section in between. You know, that's gonna function. That's totally fine, but in my mind, conceptually, and knowing that we're having conversations about what's the master plan for, or the creation of a master plan for Windjammer, does this fit? If we're looking at drawing people in as sort of a beacon from the downtown, is that the right placement? One, knowing it's lower, would we want it elevated? Do we want it, you know, is that where we want it to do that function? I don't know. I don't have the answer. But those are the questions that immediately came to mind when I was reviewing it. And like I said, it is a big footprint.
A little bit to that. We walked it with them, and this is the location that the Rotary Club selected. And independent of the discussion of the design issues, we are in the process of negotiating an agreement with them. Similar to what we did with the Sculpture Northwest for the, basically they're gonna build it and then donate it to the city, and the city will pay them a portion of their cost in designing it and building it. So they'll be encumbered of them to raise the funding and such, but they went out there and looked at it. The master plan that we discussed last time had a roundabout conceived with a much smaller windmill in it. The plan that they told you had no cost, and so there's no reason why we need a roundabout on Bay Shore and the entrance in there, but that was in the plan that it had no cost, and so that's what conceivably was, but I don't know that it really had community buy-in. So this is the location. They blocked it, they staked it. I think they have to deal with they're fully aware that they're going to have to deal with the flood issue in the design, and that'll be part of their whole application and dealing with that. As far as Phil, it continues to drop down from that area there, so we'll have to look at long-term whether we do it. Certainly when we're doing dredging, I'd like to put some of the dredging bill in there, but I don't know how much cost that is. But I mean, a lot of areas in the line is basically just dredging spoiled, so it's been really common used. Areas in, so, but we don't really have that plan for filling them in, but that's certainly a swampy area.
There's a storm drain in there that is a problem child. And I think you're right on the money there with that one, that we need to build it up in there if we can at all do it. Like, don't haul the excavation material off, and if you build a windmill in there, build it up a foot or two so we can build in the future up to it, maybe even somehow.
Because it's like 4 feet. I mean, at least to get to the path line.
Yeah, it probably
You know?
is a solid 3 foot by the time you just put a laser on it. I could put a laser on it, get you a number, so you know exactly what we're dealing with out there.
I can't remember his last meeting we had, our last workshop, that we talked about kind of making course corrections on things that didn't turn out the way that we would hoped before we added other fantastic things to it. And this sort of is like, you know, pinging my memory on that. And if I remember it, then it must have been significant, because I don't remember much of anything. So I guess I'm concerned about moving forward with a very exciting project without actually though going back and doing it. Otherwise, I'm just gonna be like, what does this feel like? This feels like Oak Harbor on repeat if we do that. You know what I mean? Where then we're gonna have another problem, and we've added this wonderful thing, but we now have more problems around it, and that would be, that would just be unfortunate.
Yeah.
You know?
Have they given a timeline at all about the windmill, when we
This
gonna
is,
have enough funding for it and when we want to start?
let's see if I can zoom in on this.
They
one.
have,
So
and It hasn't been near its original plan. It's been way behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's,
It's pretty ambitious. They need to raise about $600,000.
and then we're gonna
That's
donate
great.
to the city, but we're gonna pay them. Did I hear
We
you
can do a
correctly?
small amount, so I can't remember what it is in the contract, somewhere around 40,000 or so that we pay them back. And reimbursing them for a portion of it, and then they're gonna probably want some in-kind help. Or some help with some of the sewer and water connections that will go on there, so. And then they're confident that it'll be basically a kitchen, shelter area that we can rent out, and hoping that the plan is that the revenue we get from that house offset the maintenance on.
So the 40,000 is for the windmill, but what is, who takes the cost for the dredging or the filling or the, whatever else is coming up?
Well, generally, most of the construction costs will be part of the 600,000 estimate. They haven't been through the real preliminary plans, they haven't started the whole application. They need to get the agreement with the city finalized before they start doing the specific plans, and then that'll go through its own review process for the city, so.
This is the original kind of timeline for the
Yeah.
project, and this is really where they're at right now. So they have all this to
Yeah.
do. So if you were kind of match this up with where we are right now, if they were to move forward along the same timeline, the project would be completed late fall of 2024.
Which I think is a little bit ambitious.
Yeah,
So do we have any plans for repairing that or a timeline for that? on our end?
Yeah, it would be nice to see some prints on what they're actually thinking, their footprints and.
and it's an imposing structure. I mean, this is twice as big as the Angel of Creativity statue.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, they're working on getting some visuals of what the outside and facade would actually look like. This is very conceptual. This isn't even going to end up being what the shape is, but it'll be general windmill shape.
Blaine, do you have any idea who's going to be responsible for the maintenance on this thing afterwards?
Yes.
So we got to figure out.
They talked about, the Rotary talked about trying to help us with perpetual maintenance on it. That's why they brought up trying to do the shelter issue, whether they'll put money aside and try to raise from that in the future, I don't know. But they kind of recognize the burden that they have on the city. Yeah, because gifts, we have that issue. I mean, and I've been in other municipalities too that have that issue. People donate things and then you have to maintain them. And we have like a walk of honor on Pioneer that was put up, and it's slowly being dismantled as it wears out because the group doesn't exist that puts it up anymore. And we had the whole issue with the flagpole at the Wisconsin group that disbanded a long time ago, and we have to make a decision on what we go forward here. So it's really centered as being a piece for the park, and certainly will be a major piece for the park here. And the desire was a lot larger than the original plan.
What's its height
So
there, Brian?
83 feet, I think is the top of it.
Wow.
So Steve Schuler, the public works director, and I met with Brian Jones, who's kind of heading up this project. And that was something that we talked about. They're very aware of like, oh gosh, how we're going to like clean and maintain this. And so it is something that they're trying to incorporate with their funding.
Yeah, you're gonna need a 100-foot boom lift just to power wash it.
Right. And knowing that they stopped following through on even dog bags, I mean, as far as any helping out, makes me wonder about following through on them. But if this hadn't come up as a thing in the survey of people wanting a windmill down there, as a top item, I wouldn't even be inclined to consider it. But because there was definitely public demand for it, I think there's the necessity of figuring out some solution for it. 600,000, but I mean, if they raise that money, fine. And if we've got to put money into it, I think, okay, but who does it serve? How many does it serve? And then what's the overall long-term benefit? If it's simply a beacon in which to draw people into the city, do we need to have all those extra amenities that are going to cost another $200,000 inside it? And are they gonna generate revenue enough by rental in order to get us a payback on that? What's the return on investment?
Yeah, what kind of rental is it actually? Is it gonna be like another kitchen, or is it gonna be like a hall that you can rent out for birthday parties?
Events, weddings, what are we talking about here? And is there demand for that? Do we have data that says there's demand for that on city property? I don't have any answers for that. I don't have the data.
During the summer, yes, we get busy as can be. It's unreal.
Yeah.
During the winter, probably not so
Well,
much.
I mean, I guess what I'm
It's
asking
supposed
is,
to have heat in it, so this would be a facility that.
Year round.
Year round.
are people looking for that? That'd be the other question I'd be looking at, because we would need people that want to spend money just to offset the repair cost, because seagulls are gonna throw stuff off of it. It's gonna sit there. If we're using some of that laminated beam wood, it's gonna have UV issues that are gonna cause, resealing to be a thing.
I'm highly concerned with wind damage down there because the blades are so huge on that thing that it's Windjammer for a reason. The name of the park fits it very well.
And when those storm winds come from that direction, when we have prevailing winds this way, but when they come from that, they're the storm winds, and those things are brutal. And you ask anybody who owns a house down on Dillard Lane, ask them what they pay each time one of those storms come up to fix their houses. They'll tell you it's not cheap to live there just from the wind.
Yeah,
alone.
the engineers could take that into account.
Yeah.
That's what, and they're
They're
already,
working on that.
they're already working on that. Yeah, we have wind things with signage. So,
It's definitely driven by a nostalgic desire to
Yeah.
replace the windmill that
I was
existed there.
gonna say,
Trying to
I-
make it more functional, I think.
Yeah, I
That's
just,
great.
to your point, I don't know that the community is really asking for a rental. They really just want that structure to look at is the main thing that people want. So I don't know if we can ask the Rotary Club, can it be smaller? Because this seems like a huge project and a huge just footprint for something that I don't know it's gonna get used that much as a rental.
It's super way out of scale.
Well, but at the same time, it's really exciting though to see people having a vision for civic engagement, because I think we all kind of know that there's a lot of apathy and skepticism, I think, around things. And so to see somebody actually have an enlarge your eyes kind of vision, for me, that's actually exciting, because now we're wanting to do something that really will impact the community. My only question is, really is, well, one, I don't think we should do anything until we fix the level issues down there. I think that has to be addressed first, because we think we need to make up for our oopses before we start adding new. But I mean, I don't know, I want to encourage vision and civic engagement and, groups doing this, but can there be a little back and forth so that we can, really figure out exactly what? But to have an eye-popping idea, I'm for that. I'm for casting vision and creating big vision.
Well, I think to Brian, your point in terms of this nostalgia, I think that's exactly what the people want. And I'm not really sure why they're not then duplicating in size and general design what was removed, because that would be the nostalgia piece. I mean, this really is I
And it
don't know
had
that I
square
would,
footage in it too, the old design.
yeah,
It had the rooms inside of it.
Yeah.
multiple levels.
I can't help but wonder if there would be some, backflow from the fact that people were longing for the nostalgic windmill, and they get this huge thing that they may interpret as a monstrosity versus that's not what we had. That's not what was.
We still have the steel structure up in the back of the yard from the old windmill. I think so. Measurements can be taken off of it, or even, I was wondering if someday we want to take a piece of it down there for nostalgic reason, put it in the park and say this was the old windmill or something like that.
well, I told the plans were still available too.
To that end, though, I think it's incumbent upon us when we're taking on something like this to do kind of a good, better, best, fantastic kind of options. I mean, in the private world, this is how you present anything. I mean, that if you bought a car, and I think that would go back to the road and be like, okay, so this is your fantastic option, right? This is all the bells, all the whistles. What would be else? Because we need to offer this to the community, because they're the ones that are driving that with their response to the survey as this being a need, so that we can offer them, hey, here's 3 or 4 conceptualizations. Which one of these fits what you were voting for? which one of these answers your nostalgia issue maybe, or it answers your, you know, kind of need to see this heritage or this thing happen. And then let them speak on it. I mean, again, it's their tax money that's going to pay for the maintenance. And so if they have the information and are willing to, you know, make one of these choices along the spectrum, okay. You know, I think we need to listen to that because again, this is coming from their action and their ask, not from us pulling something out and then forcing it upon them. But we need more information to give to them, I think, so they have choice.
You know, Eric, oh, I'm sorry. Please.
Where are we in this process? What's,
They-
what's our role as the Parks and Recreation Board?
So they just are finalizing their agreement with P&L. We'll do the engineering and the design of the windmill. Everything's been very conceptual at this point, and some fundraising has been done from Brian Jones. So that's kind of, so they're still very much at the very beginning of this process. You know, it's kind of interesting, right? It's a private organization's project. It's going to be gifted to and put in on city property. So as far as our role in it and city council's role in it, I think city council is just going to look to, yes, we're good with this and accepting it. We're going to have to bring this to city council at some point, probably once they get a little more of the design and some visuals together that they can show city council, hey, okay, so here's the location, this is what it's going to look like and all that. Probably would be good idea is for, now that they have P&L under contract, is to have a joint meeting with Rotary, either have them come to the next park board meeting, or maybe we can go to one of their meetings and just have a little discussion about the vision for it. And, you know, some of your suggestions on, you know, maybe we ought to have P&L kind of give us a couple different options with design and associated costs with each one of those.
And usability after the things.
Right, yeah.
Maintenance and all the issues we talked about.
And I'm willing to bet that P&L's never built a windmill. I'd love to see a consultation with actual somebody who builds windmills.
Well, that might be kind of tough. But the other question you might ask from the engineering is like we did up at Harbor Heights is what a projected cost, you know, have them do a bid work up on it. So we kind of have an idea, are these numbers fitting together?
I guarantee you there's some other Dutch enclaves in this country that have built some windmills in recent times. Because they like to do that. You know,
well, it's kind of interesting that what they're running into.
Oh,
Our thing
Michigan
is
comes to
that
mind.
this is a very like archaic design, right? And trying to build a windmill to modern day code requirements
yeah.
is very difficult. So it's been an interesting process
Yeah.
from what Brian Jones has said with trying to figure out how to make this design work. This day and age, but
I just think there's got to be somebody
And
like,
we
you know, in the Netherlands, for example, who's built a windmill near the ocean, who might have something to say about how you build something like this for durability, for maintenance, you know, and it might, you know, behoove us to have somebody like that rather than P&L, who's fantastic at what they do, but we're talking about steel and concrete construction of, mostly industrial building, which this is sort of that. It touches on that only because of some of the function, but
I
maybe
would
that's the
say-
reason why they went to block.
Well, they've certainly given it a lot of thought. I
Yeah.
mean, effort. And I think the best thing to do is meet with them, as you suggest, not as part of this meeting, but dedicated to that, because there's a lot of questions on this. And I have some, I know when we first talked about it, I don't know if it was in our workshop or when, I was like, that's something we really need in the park, but I'm sold. I mean, I think it would give real character to the park. So I'm on board with that, for sure. And the location to me seems pretty good. Initially, I thought it was going to be on the other side of the path. So I guess it's just getting a better feel for where they've been, how they got to where they are, to where we get to a comfortable spot where we can, I guess, then we propose it to city council, or we endorse it, or.
yeah, I don't know how that process is going to end up be going forward. It's this, I don't even know if I call it a joint project at this point.
Well, it's an agreement. There'll be an
Right,
agreement with the city for them. And the city will agree to allow them to donate it to the city and provide funding to
Council will have kind of an opportunity to discuss this a little bit when we bring the park survey to them on the 26th, because that's one of the major things that came out of it. So I'm sure there'll be some discussion about that.
I just don't want an albatross and that, you know what I mean? For, you know, like we put this thing in and then we're just saddled with this maintenance. And because I like Tom, I think the idea is actually great. I think it answers something the community wants. I think it's a cool nostalgia thing. I'm worried about the maintenance and I'm worried about the site location without any upgrade to that. The last thing we want is we build this wonderful kitchen and it's all appointed and everything else. And now it's flooding.
We should talk about too, traffic volumes when the construction site, because what season are they building this thing? And if they're doing it in
Yeah, where are they
July,
going to be doing the staging?
yeah, it could get real tight. And a simple thing to solve some of that would be that walkway that you see down by the lagoon is connecting it over to the boardwalk. Concrete, an extra 20, 30 feet of concrete at the right grade for ADA access would totally, you could change the flow up and have them go around it instead of going through the construction site.
Sure.
So little things.
So is it our job as the board to get this into such a space that we're comfortable with it and we endorse it to the city council? So we do kind of the big work and ask the questions.
Council will definitely want to know your thoughts on it. And this is probably the best working group from the city side to work with the Rotary on refining the design of it. And
Can we get them to come to a meeting with Brian Jones or something? And, when Jim's gonna be here also, since he's on that, and hear directly from them and then have some engagement that way, I think that would be a very helpful next step, so we can get some more significant understanding. Does that seem fair? And is there any more information that you have, Blank? It sounds like you know a bit more about this than us, that as far as how the process goes, that we could get to read, so we're more familiar than just the site plan that Brian emailed us out.
And the email, the agreement we're working on too, it's in draft form right now, so go ahead and.
Jim was gonna give you the whole background.
Okay.
about this.
And just to kind of give you an idea of the Rotary's input on Windjammer Park or City Beach Park, it was called. The lagoon is the Rotary Lagoon. It was done in the 70s before you had to do all the permits and everything. You had to do the house, so they were able to dig it out. And then we just did a bridge partnership with them that was put in, and then we redid it. And so now there's plaques on both sides, the original plaque on one side and the plaque on the other side. So they're very involved. The Rotary's been very involved in the park.
So can we table this until we can get them here to move?
Yeah, I'll touch base with them and
Forward.
see if,
And then,
and also see what the timing is with the visuals of, because I think that'll help a lot with the discussion if they have, some design sets.
yeah, because I already think I've speculated far too far along the process to be helpful at this point, so it might be good to.
Yeah, keep in mind, and again,
Table until we have
everything
more.
we see here is conceptual.
Right. I think I'd like to hear the vision from the vision casters. That makes sense.
Any
All right.
discussion?
Okay. Ready to move on to Eric with disc golf and walking running trails proposal?
Does anybody not have either one of these that would like one? It's the presentation notes that were emailed out, and then something from Eric McCabe will be my co-presenter on this. Anybody like any of this literature?
Hey, Eric, if you could save one for me, I'd like to have one.
It also came over via email, at least one, but we'll save one for you. So what I have here is a presentation that I wrote up based off some of my passion, I think, for the community, but also looking at needs and on the back of doing a lot of interviews from park users and things that they were asking for informally, and some conversations I had with people engaged in different activities in some of the different parks. A lot of the questions I had were what were happening with Harbor Heights, and is anything going to happen there? And that got me thinking about what can we do that creates lower cost of entry for participants, a lower cost of entry as far as park creation that utilizes existing things in our parks portfolio or it takes advantage of things that are being underutilized. And then in one case, one park that we know is going to experience some changes, and changes need to be made for safety and co-participation as of park users. So to that end, what I'd like to do here is just kind of go a little bit through this document that I sent to you, and then I'll turn it over to Eric McCabe, who's joining us. He's with Dynamic Course Design based out of Emporia, Kansas. I'll let him share some more about that. Right now, he's joining us from Alaska, where he is on site at a disc golf course and park that he designed up there at Meyer Lake for an event that they're running this weekend. So I'll let him share more in just a minute. But I'd like to just kind of skim the highlights and then take questions on what I've got before I hand it over to Eric, who will talk about park design and disc golf creation, course creation, and why they're sort of, I would say, helpful, mutually beneficial. Again, one of the things that unused parkland, well, it's potential that's not being activated. Okay, we do have money in the budget for some improvements, but also we run the risk of having public lands that aren't being used or activated fully, of having unwanted activities there, which is a concern for all the neighbors. We also know that on the northwest side of the city, there's not very much as far as parkland goes. We also know that this town has very little for walking trails. We have the waterfront trail. We have Fort Nugent, which actually isn't a walking trail, but it's perceived to be. It's actually disc golf course fairways. So what's become a walking trail would be like going over to the Gallery or Woodby Golf Club and just deciding to take a stroll down a fairway. But it's become known as walking trail. Okay. And so that's what we have to operate. Yet we have some fantastic parcels of land that could really work well for that. And they don't require us to purchase any other land. They just require us to do installation and creation. And again, you know, walking, running, some of these things, you see it every time you drive around. You see sidewalks filled with this. You see the trail, if you're ever down at Scenic Heights, all the way through, being used quite frequently. We have dog walkers who are always looking for places to go, and it meets some of those needs. You know, some of the background is that these are activities, again, that work really well together because disc golf, as shown over at Fort Nugent, to do a couple of things that are advantageous to any trail users. One is the cleaning of the trash. Okay. Woodby Island Disc Golf Club has adopted Fort Nugent Park, and so it cleans up all the trash from all the other sports, as well as much of the trash that's in the woods. Again, that's never a perfect thing. I think Tally can testify to some of that consistent work, controlling or notifying city of invasive species and other things that need to be removed. And also the removal of, let's say, non-legal campers. Okay,
That's an invasive species too.
Presently, there's no camps, permanent or temporary, at Fort Nugent Park, which was not the case even a handful of years ago, where we had a rotating set of maybe half a dozen that were going through there. Those have been removed as a joint between city parks and Woodby Island Disc Golf Club. We've done a lot of work to remove the places where the camping occurred, which was typically underbrush with a canopy. So if you think about very tall salal or blackberry vines growing and creating the structure, again, blackberry vines are invasive species.
People don't take into account how dangerous some of that undergrowth becomes, especially this time of year, as fire hazard. So it is a lot to take care of sometimes along people's fence lines and try to keep it from loading up with burnable stuff.
Yeah. And to that end, I mean, some of the neighbors along Rosario have been using the park ground for their own private storage for things like firewood. We have a kitty graveyard along one of the things. So there's a lot of things that have happened that now don't happen because of the traffic that's put through there, which is to the advantage of everybody for liability and other reasons. You know, so we've had things, I mean, like the hypodermic needle issues, we've cleaned a lot of that. You know, we used to have in the little creek that runs through there was human fecal matter in that creek, and kids would play in that. So that's all been handled now that the camps are out. The last test, I think, that somebody did privately for a school project, a college project, was tested clean. So that's all a big change. And I say that to say that that makes disc golf, one of the volunteers, a wonderful partner for walking trails that we might put in, because they demonstrated over the years that they'll take care of the park outside of their own self-interest. What we're looking at is 4 properties. I already mentioned Harbor Heights. That's 76 acres with elevation change. one of my questions with parks and being on this board has always been, what does the land want to be? And then how do we use our facilities in such a way that they don't become a burden on our limited park staff as well as on a taxpayer? And with Harbor Heights, we know we've all heard, I think, the rising cost of what it would be to create that initial vision of a sports complex. Okay, it's way out of reach.
Built out at $60 million.
Right. Okay, so, and that's because of the terrain. Okay. And maybe it's because the land, and I think Jim Wiesner's expressed this as well, the land doesn't want to be that.
The picture's deceiving. It is not flat like the paper.
Yes. I couldn't make you a three-dimensional cast, unfortunately. One, it would look terrible because I'm horrible at crafts, but two,
We'll get you a big block of clay.
I'll get to right to work on it.
Yeah, there's a reason why a water tower, we like high places.
Yeah.
So that's
A lot of windmill.
There's
That's
a
pretty high.
bridge.
It's
Good
about a
point.
90-foot in-grade, yes, and that's the reason why we ended up with phase one proposal coming in at over $10 million, because $5 million was just moving the soil. Rate to grade, so I mean, it could be terraced, we have the preliminary plans. Like I said, and then it's another 10 million just to get a road in there. So,
Yeah.
Then we did do a preliminary number, we got $60 million in development, so we kind of just put it on hold. So you're actually looking at alternatives here, so.
Right.
We did a whole plan there, we do have a preliminary plan that shows soccer field to the south and ball fields to the further north there. And some open space area. Because it actually turns two ways. There's a ridge kind of going through where the upper heights is. Yeah, and there. Yeah.
It is a beautiful piece of land. It is, the grades and disc golf course, it would be beautiful. It'd be very neat. And walking paths, they're not just flat, they go up and down. In the area.
Yeah, and I know the neighbors, so they have 2.5 acre lots to the south, east of the property there. They have concern, and that a number of them on the phone
Right.
asked us what we're doing on there. A lot of concern with us opening up and making Gun Club Road and other entrance into the park, and so and then we have a long-term plan with a 16th Avenue to the south of the very bottom there in a long-term plan. And then we also have a 16th Avenue happens to be where we don't allow residential north of 16th Avenue. That's why you can see it stopping at the very bottom of its property.
The neat thing about disc golf though is like if we decided to build something more in the future, it's not that hard to move a cage. Put a road in.
Right. And I think knowing that we have that as an option for long term, we just design around it. If we're going to bring a 16 through, we can design around it. And we can design walking trails around it so we don't have to do it. Because the history at Fort Nugent has been constant redesign. That course has been redesigned up until, I redesigned it again a couple of years ago, just temporarily in order to be able to deal with
Neighbors.
and traffic and, folks using the field area. And we'll get to Fort Nugent in a minute, so we'll get back to that. But that's just been in a constant state of flux, which has caused it to pinch even more and make it even more, or I should say, make it less safe.
And the trail and course out there at Fort Nugent is a higher use item that we have in the Parks Department.
Right.
So if you did do LWA, which is an existing city street, and go through that for minimal usage, I think there was concern if we start going with a sports complex, then we got to look at another entrance. But if you were to look at other usages that are less impactful and less traffic, then you probably save a lot of money from the south there on LWA.
Correct. And I think too, once we put something in there as a city function and the neighbors to the east begin to see the benefit of it, because I'm guaranteeing many of them will actually use it if we put a walking path dump out in that direction, that it might, Blaine might get less calls, which would be nice for him. And seeing the benefit of that.
This is a nice way to ease everybody into it instead of hitting them with 5 trucks showing up with heavy equipment on there and starting to just rip and tear everything.
Right.
Eric, how is just aside from location,
Yeah.
how did the disc golf and the walkers, how do they exist together? Because I see that you're
Yeah.
tying these in with walking trails. How does that?
It's a great question. And I think Eric will speak to that a little bit more, but really what we do is, or what Eric would do is he'd create a design for us that would actually have independent circuits, essentially is what we'd be looking at. So they'd be all on the same property, but we wouldn't be functioning with the overlap issues at this point. So we'd have our walking paths and then we'd have our disc golf. But this would be, you'd see this in some resort areas that have golf courses. But then we also have, you'll have some walking paths around them. Typically this is in like larger condo developments where you'll have some walking paths that get multi-use, but then you'll have a golf course in this parkland as well. And they're independent of one another. So if we think of disc golf in terms of a golf course and know that it has its own independent traffic, but then also creating traffic lanes for other people to enjoy this property, we're going to find that we can create pretty significant walking trails throughout this that aren't going to be worried about some, plastic disc coming at 40 miles an hour, towards them. But likewise, disc golfers aren't going to always be having to look out and wonder, which is the situation that they're faced with right now, which is why we no longer host large scale tournaments at Fort Nugent anymore, because as the board, we decided to not do that because we didn't want to put 70 disc golfers out there and worry about some kid sneaking in there and getting hit, because the pain of one injury for some child or other park user isn't worth us having our own events there anymore.
And Harbor Heights is the largest footprint property we're looking at in these proposals, right?
It's the largest thing we own. It's also the largest footprint. It would also be where, the goal would be in designing it to put the largest footprint course, which will allow us to continue to host the charity events that we host. We've been hosting several a year, including, we've hosted for the Help House, we've hosted for disabled American veterans, VFW, a variety of different, we did one for an individual who had diagnosed with rare brain cancer, things that we want to be about, but don't have a place to really do it because we can't put the people on the park, even when we would reserve the park, because you can't keep people out of a city park, and for their own safety. So we just have to stop that. But continuing forward, really this land, 76 acres, allows for 1 and/or 2 18-hole disc golf courses. I'll let Eric McCabe talk more about that in a minute. But we could put something out there that will allow people to have a place to walk their dogs, to be out there with their family, potentially even create a better course for the high school to run their cross-country races. Right now, they run at Fort Nugent Park, and it's really not a great facility for them either. To do that, historically, they used to run down at Fort Casey, and nobody wanted to come here and run because the course was so hard. And that's the historical nature of where they used to run their races for 30 years until they moved to Fort Nugent. So there's options for all of that.
I'm kind of envisioning something more along the lines of the kettles with trails everywhere. Then you put your disc golf course off the trails.
And Eric will speak again more to how you can design that. I'll let him speak on the design because that's where his expertise is. I want to highlight the properties real quick and move through it so I can hand it over to him because I know time's a challenge. The other one we're looking at would be Northeast 7th. Okay, there we have a different ecosystem altogether. We go to semi-wetland. We also have improvements already going into Northeast 7th to modernize that road as a corridor, I think, from the residential area to our commercial area. We get foot traffic through there of the unsavory kind that come through the park, which is probably the result of that fire. And they're traveling through there. It's been a consistent issue to have illegal camping in kind of that general area, all the way out towards the Hilberding Farm and the industrial parks. So we could activate that land. Again, all these places are wonderful for nature walking, for birding. Okay, and the wetland would provide a different ecosystem than what we have at Harbor Heights completely, which gives us new ways of engaging nature. We're also, again, this one's going next to some communities that maybe are underserved. I would say some lower income bracket housing as well, which would again be another great place to put a park to allow access to that from people in some of these lower income brackets that live in some of this housing around there, which would be phenomenal, just like Harbor Heights. Again, there's 28.1 acres or something in there. If you look at kind of what's mapped out, it runs almost all the way up to North Big Berry Loop. It runs in between some private property on the north end, and then that mini storage area that's there, and right up against that apartment complex on the west. So can we begin the process of improving this land with, again, multi-use, multi-generational, low cost of entry park space to piggyback on the enhancements that we're already doing on Northeast Seventh, bring in again another set of activities that we'll be able to experience the natural ecosystem as it is with very little disruption, and then create spaces for multi-generational play and other healthful activities. Flip the page over. This one was the brainchild of Tally here. It was, adding to the underutilized spaces in Friend Marsh. Right now, if anybody uses that trail, sometimes people go off trail to walk towards where the water is, and there's sort of a semi footpath there, but it's not great. Okay, it's not really safe. It's an ankle breaker if you're not watching, and it's mucky pretty significantly. Yeah. And so how great would it be to enhance that trail? And then could we put some other, again, activity in there that's going to put foot traffic on there that's going to help keep some of the unwanted traffic down? Could we create something in partnership with the Arts Commission to do an art walk in addition to trail enhancement? And then a really beginner, family-friendly kind of disc golf course down there, again, to put foot traffic on there. You're seeing a lot of disc golf course on a lot of places, but it's a cheap thing compared to other things to add. That brings another activity that's very low cost to families. I mean, you're talking $10 a disc. Okay, what can you do for $40 for a family? You can't even go to Burger King for that, which is right there, right? Go get Mod Pizza, you spent twice that, okay? And that's fine, but can we do something like that for the community? And again, keep people in the Windjammer Park area longer so that they are having a better engagement with the waterfront, so that they are having chances to spend money at the local places to put tax revenue back in, to have more things that we can highlight at Windjammer Park that don't drastically change the landscape. And again, we get people now in a third environment, this Friend Marshland, which is near the water. It's got some historical significance. And also it would, for park users, ask them about their allergies when Friend Marsh grows up. If we can do a few things that help take that hay level down, you're going to have a greater satisfaction for people who are engaging in the park, because we're not going to have nearly as much of the land that's dedicated to high irritation for those who suffer from allergies. And we get people out again in nature. And as Tally said, it's a great spot, I think, to make something very visible and very easy for multi-generational play.
Yeah, just to go along with that, the lighter green areas, the 3 parcels, 2 up there by the bank on the north side. The Conservation Futures Grant, and then the piece down on the bottom there, that's waterfront.
Yeah.
So we're trying to purchase those through a county Conservation Future Funding Grant proposal. So there's likelihood I can get 2 or 3 parcels in this first round and come back and get the other one. The one on the south side would really give us on the bottom of the waterfront, would give us some parking area there.
That will give us access then, Blaine. to
Yeah,
that.
because we don't officially have access
Right.
to this property there.
That'd be
And
fantastic.
so that's probably the most critical one I would like. I think they're all 3 real critical parcels. Then the 6-acre parcel, that's just, I'm not trying to do that, but in the future, 3 acres are owned by Carl Friend and 3 acres are owned by Scott Thompson. So there's a possibility of getting the 3 acres from that in the future. But right now, we're just focusing on those 3 remnant parcels around it. So, and when you're talking about too, one of the things why we didn't score really high is we haven't been doing the natural planning and such. But the little walking trail, the Friend Marsh walking trail area, we've done a lot better job of restoring it and putting it area there. We did it too good, and we ended up becoming a camping site, but
Yeah.
we've had to raise it up, and unfortunately, we've had too much in there with people being drawn to this area. And certainly, you're raising some good points there, and I think the county, we got that with Conservation Future. I think is what we got the funding for it originally for it. So they would really like us to see walking trail. You can do a little parking lot, fix the area. And I think if you're sensitive enough to the environment, you probably can look into this golf and to have some restrictions, because we did buy that with
Yeah.
Conservation Future funding.
Again, I think, we run the marathon through there and the half marathon goes through there. Adding trails puts more of that traffic on potentially in the park area and less of it on the roads, which typically don't get controlled as well. For the kids, the kids runs and stuff too, and we can, give them a little longer loop inside the park. There's a lot of multi-use that could happen just by creating those trails. Again, I'd like to see a partnership with the Arts Commission to give them some sort of more engaged sculpture area, which I know has been a concern that's been expressed to me by their board members.
I
There's a
like the way
lot-
that this ties into the park,
Mhm.
that it just feels like a natural extension that, oh, Windjammer Park, they have disc golf there, they have trails in there. It's-
And that was exactly what Tally said when he first brought this idea to me, and then said, hey, will you write this up when you do the rest of it? That's exactly right. One more, diverse way that families can play together, which, or individuals can play, which is so important to the mental health and just the physical health of our community, is just multi-generational play, never stop playing. And if we can put one more thing down there that's low cost, that's relatively safe, that's,
And close to downtown.
right. And what a great place to run camps for kids and things like that, in the summer with whoever wants to program that type of thing, having that there.
I think it's gonna be super important. I think there's multiple ones in the future will be probably something you'll be wanting to look into, but to take some of the pressure off of Fort Nugent right now, because there's so many people going out on that course. It's just busy, busy, busy. We're out there mowing in the middle of the week and they're out there utilizing it all the time.
Yeah, right, and the overlapping competition then with soccer and, authorized or unauthorized practices or impromptu, being able to just share the space better. And that's one of the concerns, which will bring us then to Fort Nugent real quick. I think we've already covered it sort of openly here, but the park has a lot of competition for space and not a lot of it. And then what we do have in space, what that's open belongs to the school district. I've drawn on a map here kind of how the disc golf course lays out. The yellow is kind of potential improvements that we've talked about to the park, where you'll see like the entrance coming in and then potentially in addition to the parking lot, which I tried to highlight in yellow, and you see that immediately takes away 2 disc golf holes. That third one that is in there on that path, the blue are all the disc golf holes. We created to remove homeless camps that were camping in there right next to the football field. And then you look, there's 5 out in the field that share with soccer. So on Saturdays and Sundays, when we would run events, those 5, things become either useless or unsafe, no matter if we paid to reserve the park or not in the past. We stopped paying to reserve the park because it didn't matter for anything. And it was just a $500 cost that we were accruing to no benefit. And then you see everything else in the woods. But again, the idea in the mind of the local residents is that these are walking trails, which are actually not, they're disc golf fairways. Okay, that said, walking is so important, that we would like to see if this can be redesigned into something smaller. Redesign this into like a 9-hole, if it can be done at all. If we do some of these other projects and don't want to redesign, okay. But I think historically it's been part of the park. So continuing to keep it there, which for the health of those walking trails, I think might be a good idea, but the disc golf club, knowing that they'd have to give up their long-term, place of play for the exchange of another, is a worthy sacrifice. And then to continue to maintain those trails and keep things clean and safe back there is still a high priority, because it's like a child to us in a way, we've nurtured it along. So, and redesigned it and all this stuff to continue to try to make it safe for the park users. There's also some property line issues back there, which I think once we start to explore, the school district starts to explore construction, property lines might start getting marked out. We're going to see that some of this stuff might be on private land. Okay. And historically, the owner of that property behind that park used to let us temporarily set up back there for events, but unwanted campers put an end to that. So there's still some stuff that's kind of crossing over, including the walking trail. So again, just redesigning that to get it all back within parks, thinking about, Tally and I've spoken about, what about a fence on that back boundary? Assuming the park never expands by acquiring land or anything back there, right? That way we can continue to control that traffic, because homeless folks will still pass through to camp on that that private land back there. And if we can keep them out of the park and they can access from a different way, of course, and they're gonna be resourceful enough to do that. But if we can not have them go to the places where families and children are trying to play, if we're not gonna have to worry about some of the disturbances from people that are under the influence of substances or having psychotic episodes, and some of these other things that we in the disc golf club have had sort of engaged with for the safety of other, it would be a benefit. And so that's the essential scope. There's costs involved, which is on the back page. You were all emailed out a proposal for what it would look like to design the entire thing. I also sent additions over to do them if we did them individually, which of course the cost would be significantly higher to do them as individual in stages rather than get the design done all at once and the purchase of the equipment. Even if we design them late, install them later, having the design done all at once and the purchase of equipment is going to save. There'll be savings on travel from our course designer. There'll be savings on equipment, shipping and freight, because we're talking about a truck, a semi full of gear. There is money in the budget for improvements for Harbor Heights. It's already there. It's sitting there. People have asked about reallocating that to other things. We still could do some of that while using it to do this improvements here and get these projects started to start activating this land. Northeast 7th doesn't have much, but there is some money in the upcoming budget for doing a feasibility study, which could again then be used, I think, to having an actual vision for feasibility study. So we can move forward on pursuing that. The cost for all the projects, if we did them all at once with design, is just over $70,000. When you compare that to $60 million for a sports complex, it's kind of attractive idea.
We're utilizing the land finally.
We're utilizing the land. We're making good on what we purchased. We're activating it for multi-purpose, for multi-generation, for multi-ability, age and stage. And I think those are all worthy goals. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Eric McCabe real quick to talk to you about the disc golf side of things. He's our preferred designer for a lot of reasons. I'll let him share about that. But this booklet is the creation of his office. And Eric, if you can hear me, why don't you just go ahead and take over. Eric McCabe is, again, dynamic course design. He is head coach of Emporia, or what is it? Emporia University or
Emporia State University. Yep.
State University Division I disc golf program. He's also the 2010 disc golf world champion. So he's got experience both on the playing side, the designing side, the coaching side. That community does a lot for veterans. They have a direct tie-in with their product to sort of military and law and order ideas because it's very important to them. So there's a lot of natural fits here. Plus, I think Eric has a fantastic name, which is super important. These are jokes. Anyway, I'll hand it over to Eric and let him kind of talk to you about what he can bring to the table as far as design and stuff.
I appreciate it, Eric. And thank you everybody for taking, letting us come in and give this proposal out. I won't keep too much of your time here because I know it's kind of been a long one already, but Eric touched base on majority of the stuff that I wanted to touch base on as far as multi-generational recreation, lower cost of entry, those kind of things. Obviously, we don't cost as much as putting in a ball field or anything like that. More people can enjoy it because it can be a individual sport and it can be a team sport as well. I'm from Emporia, Kansas, just to give you a little background. We've kind of been coined the town of Emporia knows disc golf Disneyland, however you want to word it. We've got it's a town of 28,000 people when the university is in session during the school months, and we have around 11 disc golf courses from beginner friendly all the way up to championship level. And we do host big events every year. We host majors. The Dynamic Discs Open has in the past historically been the largest disc golf tournament in the world, right in Emporia, Kansas, which is actually a flyover state as much as you probably already realize. But we can bring 1,600 to 2,000 people to town for these week-long events. And the economical impact on that is around $2.5 million for a community of 28,000 people. That's a lot for that community. So they've really embraced disc golf, and it's been great. It's been great for us in the community. And, the more outreach we can get, the better. I mean, there's physical exercise, low impact activity, strength and coordination, balance and flexibility. You're outside in the nature. It's good for your mental health. There's just so many list of things that can definitely be beneficial to installing disc golf courses, and obviously having walking trails integrated with them is very important, actually. And having the designer, the course designer myself, help with those layouts as well is very beneficial, instead of just having the disc golf course put in and then someone that maybe isn't as familiar come in and put these walking trails through. That's when you kind of bring safety into issues. An example, Piasto, Iowa, actually at Kelly Parks, I had transformed an underutilized area into a thriving recreational space by combining disc golf and a network of walking trails. It enhanced the aesthetic appeal of the park, provided a safe, inviting environment for disc golf players and walkers, hikers, park goers, those kind of things. So very beneficial. We can coexist, and that's the beauty of it, I think. Talk a little bit about me. I've been in the sport of disc golf since the early 90s. I traveled professionally from the year 2003 up until about 2014, when I stopped touring professionally and started getting more into the business side of the sport, the head coaching stuff, the course designs. I've actually designed over 80 courses in 28 states in Canada. My goal is all 50 states at some point, and state is not on to add a state to my resume. So some of the courses you have designed have been utilized in PDGA Amateur World Championships, professional championships. As I mentioned, Elite Series event, the Dynamic Discs Open, and Emporia is home to disc golf, is what we call it. And I think Oak Harbor and Harbor Heights Park and all the spots up there in your neck of the woods could put disc golf on the map. It really can. So I think that's really all that I have right now. Thanks for listening to our proposal, considering all that, and obviously Eric and I are here for any questions that you guys may have.
I think one thing that needs to be said is, like, I'm not interested in creating disc golf courses on their own. If we're not doing multi-use with multi-generational focus, then let's not do any of this project. If we're not going to try to do things that are going to allow, multiple uses for multiple types of activity, then we've missed it. We don't need in the community, I don't think, putting our investment into these parklands for like single function. Those things get used in seasonality and they sit. We want stuff that can be used 365 days a year by a variety of people with a variety of concerns, and have them at high enough quality that people are proud to use them. Things that they would share with their friends and their family, that they want to use, not because they have to, because it's the only thing available to them, but because they want to. And I think that's the vision here that got me interested in putting this proposal together, is that we can have all of these things. Because I don't do one thing in hobby. I like to go take my kids on a walk. I want to go point out to them what's happening in the woods, and where can we learn, and where can we do this? And what's the difference between a wetland and a forest, and what benefit can I see between there and the marsh, and the waterfront. And I think most people resonate with that. But if we're only looking at doing one thing, then we've missed it. And I want to make sure that that's clearly communicated here. Is if it's not multi-use, then I would rather wait for the next better option that is going to hit a wider demographic and allow more people to enjoy the park. Because disc golf is just one thing that hundreds of people in our community do, but it's just one thing, and that's not, one thing isn't good enough in a small town like this. We need to do that, and that's why it's important to talk, like what Eric was talking about activating these lands in a way that create harmony in the different activities, or like Tally was talking about, activating the kettles. You get a lot of different park users out there. I wouldn't advocate for walking trails and mountain biking on the same place. That's a recipe for injury and liability. But other than that, I think there's a lot that could be done there. And so that's kind of what we offer and submit to you here. With any questions or comments that you have, I'd love to.
Walking trails are pretty high up on the survey, aren't they?
I don't have it in front of me right now.
I'm looking at it right now.
One of the biggest uses of Windjammer Park was walking, running. In fact, that's number one. Yeah.
It's kind of a partnership with the walking, running and the disc golfers, you know, they help each other out by creating more trails.
And I think what we want to keep in mind too is like Fort Nugent, for example, has a very difficult time for like parks to access the different areas. We want to think in terms of where we can get vehicles back there so we can get trash and recycle and get that out and dump it and have these things. We want to have, in the proposal that we offered that Eric created, you're also seeing, you know, large kiosk signs that are going to have maps, which would highlight the walking trails and the disc golf trails, points of ingress, points of egress. Again, signage that would say, hey, where you'd be leaving a walking trail and entering into a place where flying discs might occur, you know, things like that, which we've all had at Fort Nugent over time, but a lot of them have been vandalized, removed and otherwise. And I only have so much money in the Woodbury Island Disc Golf Club budget, and only so much money in my own budget to be able to replace those things. And but all that signage would be included in the proposal. So we'd have very clear, modern, obvious stuff already created. The city signs doesn't have to come back and try to create this stuff in their spare time, because it would all come in this package of these estimates that have been created. So again, you know, information is
So
empowering.
Eric, speaking of the proposal, that wasn't included in the packet, but I remember seeing a copy of that. Now that was about 70,000 for 3 courses, 3 locations, right?
It was 71 and some change. It got, I think I sent it to Sabrina. Did I not send that to you, the proposal?
You sent me I just put it in the packet,
So,
so it was that document.
So it's like 71,000 and some change, which would get you the design of 3 new courses, which would be at Friend Marsh, Harbor Heights, and Northeast 7th, including the walking trails. Okay, including all the signage, all the disc golf baskets, which are all made of stainless steel to, you know, withstand our particular climate. It would include, kiosks. Eric would be throwing in a free kiosk sign, which would have the map for everybody to see at the major point. He'd be throwing that in for free in this project, as well as 1 practice basket, which would be, you know, and those are street retail at like $600. So he'd be throwing that in, you know, for free to do this project. Eric and I have been trying to get something done at Harbor Heights since Harbor Heights was beginning to be purchased. So he's been with me working on this now for almost like 4 years, I think, or something like that. So it's been a long journey, and that's why he's willing to throw in some of these bonuses. We redesigned Fort Nugent in that cost using the existing equipment that's already there, but redesign it, which would be included in that as well. And so we have this all professionally designed, which is great for the city because now we have somebody that we can blame it on. I joke, but we're using a professional, so we're not taking, you know, it's not on us as the city to say like, well, we did this. And when somebody complains about something else, we're using actually somebody who does this rather than us as amateurs coming in and creating a design that may or may not meet muster or safety. We let somebody who's an expert do this at a very low cost. I mean, we're talking like $10,000 or less per design for a trail network and a disc golf course.
Do you have the estimate? Let's program. It talks a little bit about like concrete and baskets, but like the numbers.
Then I had the numbers. I emailed them in the original emails. I can send them back out. So I have it split up as 1 package that Eric created for all 4, which is going to be the best value. We can travel. Then we have them do each individually, and you're going to see the cost would then balloon to like almost $90,000. And that, again, 2 things that are dependent on that is freight costs, which that market is volatile. So that may go up and down, and travel costs, which again is volatile. So that number might go up. I don't see any of those going down. That's not typically how that works.
Oh, I know how to get them to go down. I know disc golfers will work for pizza.
Well, that's true. The labor will, you know, we'll be on a disc golf club. We'll put in a whole lot of labor, you know, in order to do this stuff. I mean, more than happy. And I'm sure I can get other volunteers to join in. I'll email out the cost of the individual proposals. If you didn't see that on the original email, as well as the combined proposal, I'll send that all out after this meeting later today.
Yeah.
I think I have it.
It's in the file that we didn't
Okay.
send out that I replaced.
Yeah, I didn't print it all out. Each one came with its own individual sort of setup. The best way to do concrete is obviously with a truck. There's going to be certain places where you can't get in. So you're talking about some of that labor for a wheelbarrow brigade, which again, you know, to get concrete is the most permanent. You don't have to do that. You can do other things, but they're going to require more maintenance. You know, you can do turf. which is nice on the joints, but it's gonna require resanding and a whole bunch of other things that, while volunteers are happy to do that stuff, coordinating between volunteers and city for materials and some of that other stuff tends to be a challenge. So usually the most permanent solution is the best one. So concrete pads, which are going to last for a while. And yeah, those are a little bit obtrusive to the nature. You know, knowing that concrete's not natural, but typically they weather in fairly nice and can blend in. And again, this isn't going to be where the main foot traffic for non-disc golf users is going to be. So if we can create permanent, safe in all types of weather, knowing that the disc golf course gets used 365 days a year, irrespective of snow, rain,
And is it-
hail.
The concrete and those kind of installation
Concrete-
costs included in this, or is this? just
Concrete is
for-
not included in there. So you need concrete to set the basket sleeve into the ground. There's a sleeve, like a post essentially that goes in there, and then you can lock the basket to it. So it can be either taken out, moved around, replaced, whatever it might need to be if there's damage from falling limbs or vandalism. And then you have, you know, typically a 6x12 concrete slab, 4 inches thick is ideal. And that those costs aren't in there. Whidbey Island Disc Golf Club has already begun fundraising. And we'll do more once we know we have something to fundraise to, rather than just for the club, so that we can create, you know, revenue to help out with concrete costs as
So
well.
they're about a yard a piece.
Yeah,
So that'd be about $250 in materials in each one.
yeah, it's unless if you do it on a truck. I mean, if you get a truck up.
Truck is $250 a yard now.
Yeah, okay.
So about 54 pads.
The last time, yeah, it depends on the scope and extent of what would have to be reused at, you know, Fort Nugent and things like that. But if we were to do, and I think there'd be some debate at Friend Marsh if it would be 18 holes or 9, depending on how beginner friendly we'd want to make it. But again, Friend Marsh would have the easiest ability because you could roll up and dump pretty much everywhere on that, depending on the season in which you did it. Whereas the ones in the woods would have a little bit more challenge in Northeast 7th because the semi-wetland would, you know, it's going to require some back work, but
I'm not
again,
even like Fred Marsh, I would be against setting up the pads all in one area up on the top, pouring them, and then packing them out there with the backhoe or the excavator,
Well-
setting them in place, precasting them all in one spot to bring the cost down.
and you definitely could do that. You know, I'm of the guy that overbuilds everything, so when I replaced some of the ones at Fort Nugent, I've anchored them into the ground with rebar and done a whole bunch of other stuff that's kind of unnecessary. But again, I like to do the job once and not do it again, so I overbuild things, but I think what you're saying is totally acceptable. It really just comes down to, does this fit the vision of what we want parks to look like? Do we want to have this kind of lower cost activity that isn't permanent, that doesn't completely mar the ecosystem in order to do it or not? And is this something that people would be interested in? And then we can do that and then turn our attention to some more of the permanent structures like an activation and, you know, like pickleball and some of these other things that we need to get done.
Sure helps fire up our rec side of the parks.
We have about 15 minutes left, just
Yeah.
so, yeah.
So I apologize. I know I don't do anything short. But I wanted to make sure you had all the information so you could understand the scope of what we're trying to accomplish and the relative costs or lack thereof compared to other projects. And we can do all this less than what we're going to do the pickleball courts for, minus the labor.
Well, a couple of
Great.
comments.
Yeah.
One is, we need a field trip, because this would mean a lot more to me if I was looking at the sites.
Yeah.
And two, we gotta work it into our overall plan, which we're progressing on, we sent out the spreadsheet today. So we already have a couple of things to add to that here, or at least incorporate. One is the development of Windjammer Park land around the proposed windmill. That'd be falling on us. And then the other would be this. So along with probably others. So I think a field trip.
I really like the idea of multi-use, of doing like trails along with the courses. And then even especially in the Friend area where you could potentially add the art walk. I like commitment to that. It really makes it truly everybody can use kind of project.
It's kind of historically how the Fort Nugent trip, disc golf course has been an everybody course too, people walk their dogs, walk on it. So that historically would stand up too as to what kind of use is going on it.
Right, and we can, and now if we design these things right, we can do them in a way that's safer than what Fort Nugent is morphed into, which would be fantastic.
And disc golf is a very fast growing sport.
And it's the second fastest growing behind pickleball. Any other questions, comments, criticisms?
We're working somewhere other than Windjammer.
Yeah.
We need to explore some of our other areas.
I would just ask what's next steps.
It's a great question. So I think, assuming that it got approved, that we approved this here and made a motion to city council to consider it or something, which I believe would be the next step. For the Wood Beyond Disc Golf Club, our next thing is we're going to launch a disc golf marathon fundraiser. Okay, to start generating revenue towards this. I think then we'd have to do feasibility studies, Eric would then, if we agreed to contract with Eric McCabe and Dynamic Course Design, then we'd probably schedule a site visit and travel with him to come out and he'd start, putting GPS whiskers in and doing all that stuff for design on site, because again, right, like Tom said, you need to get there and actually see what you're doing. He doesn't do any design without seeing it, not doing it off some GPS plat. That's not an effective way. So that would be the next steps. And then he'd bring back the designs and then we figure out how that works with the city, I think, to create.
Would he create nice enough maps that we could use them on our website, city website when we're done?
Absolutely.
Explain
Yeah.
where these are at and how they work.
Yep, absolutely. The maps that we create are all through Google Earth imaging. And it'll be much like the kiosk that you guys have right out front. You'll have access to those files as well, to do what you want with. Put them on your websites, flyers, whatever you want. So I'll provide those as well as the actual kiosk that goes up the property.
I do for other forms of revenue, I would, if it's within city regulations, fundraising by getting corporate and individual sponsors on a per hole basis. I know we allow that for signage at Little League, allowing a bolt-on sign, that would happen at the T-pad, if we want to add anything like benches, those kinds of things, which again could be positioned in such a way that could be multi-use, especially at Harbor Heights, knowing that we're going to have hills and stuff in there. And then as well as some signage that would maybe go around the actual baskets themselves. So again, we can give some premier impressions for local civic-minded businesses and individuals who, whether they want to be anonymous or not, but allow them the opportunity. I think that would bring the cost down to a very reasonable thing that other courses have done is $1,000. Okay, per hole, and you already covered the basket and concrete costs. I don't know if you can speak to that, Eric, about corporate or individual sponsorships, but $1,000 per hole, pretty reasonable.
It really is, yeah. And the way we print our signs and have our signage made up, we actually can put logos of corporate sponsors or whoever, the local mom and pop shop as well. We could put all those logos right on our T signs, our kiosks, and we actually have the ability to do them on the tops of the baskets as well. So for the $1,000, that's a really great deal. And recommendation is on a year or 2 year basis. So you can go back to those after that year or 2 year and renew or potentially find somebody new that wants to help out with some funds as well. So, yeah.
And we can do that so the city controls that revenue. We can do that so it's a partnership between the city and the disc golf club, or it's particularly for the disc golf club, given permissions. I think a mutually beneficial split would be a very valuable thing, knowing that the disc golf club would program the area and would do a lot of the volunteer maintenance, but it would allow the city to again recoup some costs by selling these things every 2 years at $1,000, or if we inflation adjust that over the handful of years, I don't see any reason that would be of a benefit.
Well, after building it, I see the cost actually going backwards, more like $500 for every 2 years. A lot of money to help and maintain those trails.
Sure.
Of course.
I mean, we could do all kinds of stuff too for the people who buy the first buy. We put a brick in at the bottom of the kiosk, the course kiosk. That's a very inexpensive way to give them, honor in perpetuity. for their initial investment. And we're talking about very low cost things, but for a lot of economic return, and the fact that we could fundraise this well enough to pay it off. You're talking $72,000, and we have, 54 or 72 holes if we redesign Fort Nugent, put 2 pads on it instead of just one.
How big was that tournament?
$1,000 a piece, it's covered.
How big was that tournament you held about 3 years ago? That had like 300-400 people at it.
Well, we had about 300 or 400 people that came. We had about 100 participants, which was too many for Fort Nugent, to be honest. Before, when we could access the backland and had 27 holes, then it was fine. There was one event that they had that was before my time at the club where they literally were giving away a car for somebody got a hole in one, and you think about that on very big disc golf or golf tournaments, but to be able to do that on the disc golf scale, there has been historically large events, that have been here. To get to that place again, I'm not sure, but we have the ability again to just draw multi-day and build towards these things. We just need the course to do it.
Hey, Jana, I recommend we wrap up this
Yeah.
item and
Please.
if the board has any recommendations or want to pass a motion as far as this goes on how you'd like to see it proceed.
Brian, can you say that one more time for me?
Let's wrap up and see if the board has any other comments or questions and then how you guys want to proceed.
Okay, did anybody else have any other comments regarding the proposal?
Are you talking about for this topic or for the meeting?
For this topic.
For this topic.
Well, I want to echo Tom's point about looking at the spreadsheet and, adding whatever we have to add from this meeting, how it fits into the overall plan. I think it's a great idea. Exciting to see it happen. All the reasons that you described. I think that's a really important part. I'd like to join in on that tour as well.
I think to wrap it up. Schedule the tour, schedule a field trip. And we had a lot of other things beyond what Eric mentioned. I don't know if we want to do one of those. We've already added the Windmill as another.
You do that.
Okay, so if there's nothing else, Brian, did you want to go over your director report, or I don't know if we have time for the Windjammer Park feedback report?
Can I say one thing though on that? Do we have, just so I'm clear, we don't want to make any motions to city council until we go on a field trip? We don't want for them to review it or anything. Until we go on a field trip. I just want to make sure so I know what next steps are for me to do on this proposal to try to schedule something and coordinate with all of you interested parties to have a look. So I know what my responsibilities and work needs to be.
I think it sounds like a field trip would be the next step, and then we can move forward with making a recommendation to council.
Sounds great.
Take in mind, some of the locations have no trails.
So I was just thinking about that. We'll have to go open up a few spots so you can get through and look in there actually first.
Yeah.
Harbor Heights we can get through. Northeast 7. Yeah.
Harbor Heights is pretty rough right now too.
If you had to narrow it down and choose like 2 or 3 out of those spots, what would you do?
If I was going to choose anything, I'd choose developing Harbor Heights for the sake of the community and for, I think, the value of activating that land.
All right, we will schedule a special work session to do a couple site visits. Run through these really quick. Since we went over this last time, you guys all have a copy of the feedback report for Windjammer Park. Sabrina's here if you have any additional questions about this survey or the results, or if there's anything you want to throw out there, Sabrina, of significance. This is going to go to council at the next council meeting and presented on the 26th for these results. In it, we have at the end household demographics and what those priorities came out as for staff recommendations. So if there is any other comments that you want us to pass on to council, or a motion of recommendation, either in support of staff recommendations or the board's own recommendations that you would like council to consider before we start jumping into some of these improvements based off the funding that we have existing. We'd like to get that from you guys.
Eric, I feel like you had a lot of really good ideas and suggestions regarding this at the last meeting. Is there something like a recommendation that you would like to add to this?
I think I spent a lot of time saying that we should fix our oopses before we move forward, but I think that was the only thing that wasn't necessarily on there. If I remember correctly.
Improvements of the courts.
Yeah, well,
I think like that's mostly what the staff recommendations are repairing and fixing. Kind of getting back to where we want to be before we add in.
And I think it would be helpful for me just to understand what oopses are if they're not there, so that we understand that moving.
it was about the level of the park, particularly. But we kind of addressed in the Windmill conversation about it being too low there and just fixing that situation before we started going on developing anything else. I think was a main point of conversation and was my main concern there, is that we don't continue to add stuff into the park or do other things before we fix that, not knowing what that all might entail. Because again, we didn't have the fill from that we expected to have, so it's where it's at now, and it just needs to be changed so that we can then add all these right where they need to be and take care of some of these things in the way that they need to be done. So the bedrock layer literally is where it has to be, that way we're not going back and wishing we would have, or having to move stuff at a higher cost later when we go to do that. Because if we flood and all those other things that may very well happen, it's not going to be fun maintenance wise, and we're going to be paying for the same work twice. If we have some of that destruction, and that would be a bummer.
And I think to your point, Garry, there was some conversations about, since there was some consistency in what people were asking for in all the different formats, then what were the other things from a staff perspective that we saw that we knew were coming up, which is why some of those things ranked out in those recommendations, because we had the recent storm damage, we have the splash park. There are several things that we know are continual things that we hear about that are in addition to the main items that kept coming up in the results. So if we have this funding to use, let's look at that as a resource and see if there's a way to address some of those needs. So that's where we put those recommendations together. So that's why I'm saying if there's other things that we might have missed. Now, when it comes to the land and I want to use the carnival as a reference. There's been conversations about that. We had conversations during the preparation of this about, was there some repairs? We heard from some of the engineering staff that there were some repairs done with some of the soil. We haven't done any formalized tests to confirm that, but apparently there was some work done. So again, as a staff member who came in after some of this was done, that's the information I was able to obtain.
I'm just remembering now, we talked about the creek at Windjammer that doesn't work. That was another thing, right? So we had the creek that didn't work there, and that was like,
Is that the lazy river?
whatever that thing. Yeah, that it doesn't work right because of how it functions. Tally can speak more to that. And then I think those were the areas that I was saying, it's like, let's just clean up these things that we've already done, but they don't work the way in which we intended, either because we didn't have dirt or the creek didn't work out the way we had. So we can clean these things up and say, like, these things are all working. Now we're adding these other wonderful things that the staff came up with too, in addition, and it's all actually like working and doing its job. And I think that is something that we owe to the community. And I think will help.
Out there that we should address too, as far as bringing it up to speed and hooking it on to the rest of the new system.
I just want to help create, fix those things so we can create more enthusiasm and excitement, and optimism, because those are things that are, I think, lacking among the community. And if we can fix those things where we didn't maybe get it right the first try, or we just had unexpected things that threw us off course, we can now get those and say, like, yeah, we hear you, and we're doing this the right way, not how their perception might be of how things get done, sort of ad hoc.
And that's where I think
forward to
the
that
data
list.
shows that, because I had the privilege of reading through all of the additional
God
comments.
bless you.
And I will say, this isn't just staff related in that tone, it's what we also saw through a theme of things that people were asking for. So that's why we tried to be, I would say, general in the concept of like, when you look at number 3, fix the splash park.
Yeah.
Make the necessary repairs to the splash park to repair and update the equipment. Because I think to your point, that covers a variety of things that may be going on there, and leaving that up to our staff to look at and say, what is the list of things that we know are coming? Let's get a quote for that. Let's find out how that fits into the overall budget. And then we just tried to prioritize them, and that's how repair the shoreline came out at number 1,
Yeah.
because that is a huge impact to people's usability and how they like the look of the park. So that's what we were trying to address as well.
Yeah. And I think you were super wise with the wording that you did. I think that was really smart.
Any other thoughts, comments,
Yeah.
recommendations that you want passed on the council? Present this.
I don't want to pass that.
All right. We're up with time, so just a couple other real fast things to make you aware of. The launch float got put in time for carving season opening up down at the marina. We are taking care of a couple of broken pieces of equipment. Ridgewood has a broken swing there. I know there's an autistic kid that uses that quite a bit, and so Tally and his crew are taking care of those. We had some reports of like bees over at the Fort Nugent Tower, so that they're taking care of that.
It's bee season.
Yeah. As far as the Angel of Creativity, all the permits have been uploaded into our permitting system. We have uploaded the revised conditional use permit application, does that today. And then we should be able to have everything finished with submittals by this week. For the lagoon channel maintenance and the dock replacement at Windjammer, we're still waiting on a FEMA floodplain report from our contractor, and then we'll have both packets of information to submit to our permitting system. I think we'll begin uploading materials this week, probably about Wednesday, and then we just need to have the biological assessment completed by Marina Surveys and Assessments, which we've contracted on to do that. And so that's getting closer. The dock replacement isn't going to happen until next year, probably in summer at the latest or earliest.
So we combined those two, if you understand, so it's under one grouping now. That's why the channel's dredged now. We were on the old permit.
Gotcha.
Janet, I had a shared AED at Fort Nugent on my director update, but do you want to speak to that real quick?
So Brian sent me a voicemail from the head paramedic for Whidbey Island Health, I believe. It sounds like football would be interested in letting us sharing the use, but there isn't a clear indication of whether or not football owns it or if Whidbey Health had originally purchased it. So if we did use it, we'd probably have to replace any of the pads and whatnot. The other part that I heard was that we need to create a different lock for the door. I wasn't so sure about that. Or is it like, what is the lock on the snack shack right now?
It's separate, the keys and everything else on the building.
Yeah, did you hear that, Janet? It is a separate.
Okay, so, but that's where the AED is at. It's inside that. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so I guess my question is, so is that something that the city is going to update that lock or get us a key so we can access it?
Well, there's other issues with that unit too, and that one of them will be maintenance because they have to be certified every year.
Right.
That's why the Parks Department has not taken control of it in the past. It's something we could do in the future because you have to have reports on it every year that its batteries are checked and then no, we cannot let just anyone into that facility because they store so much food in there. It's a target for break-ins for the homeless. They try to break in because they got tons of freezers in there. They got freezers of food. It'd be like a buffet.
Right. So I guess is there another solution then
Yes. it
to
would be,
making it accessible?
My idea would be to put it on the outside of the building on some sort of lock box.
Okay. So is that something that we could move forward with and make happen before fall sports really ramp up in September?
And the other question is, other fields, do we want to put any more of them out there?
Like one over at the baseball fields at Windjammer?
And we do have some ARPA funding that we might be able to take care of that with. So, but the answer is yes. Yeah, we can get that done.
Okay, awesome. That would be great.
Okay, let's see. You're probably aware we have a lot of Fort Nugent vandalism happening right now.